In a world where PC gaming is becoming center stage, it's fun to reminisce about a time when console was king. 1972 saw the release of the Magnavox Odyssey, which may be a surprise to you, but that was the very first video games console. Now, the whole concept behind console gaming is it allowed gamers to come out of the arcade and play games at their leisure, whether it was in the home or in the arcade. Now, we're looking at the best sellers today, but what will shock you is some of the omissions and some of the surprise entries in our top 10. So here is the 10 best-selling video games consoles of all time.
Kicking off with a classic, in at number 10 with 61.91 million sales, it is the beloved Nintendo Entertainment System. The NES was released in 1983 and it's the console that's credited with revitalizing the gaming industry after the crash in 1983. Not only that, the NES truly established Nintendo as a major player with seminal games and franchises. On this console we saw the likes of Mario 1, 2 and 3, as well as the original Legend of Zelda, Metroid and many others. The NES had a massive impact upon gaming as we know it, and many of its franchises are still as beloved to this day. In at number 9, with 81.51 million units sold, it's the Game Boy Advance. Yet another entry for Nintendo. The GBA started life as a mysterious concept project known as the Atlantis back in 1997. It claimed to have a 32-bit processor, but it wasn't until 2001 that we heard that sweet sound when you turn on the GBA for the very first time. We got to see classic franchises such as Pokemon, Mario Kart and The Legend of Zelda, as well as new ones like Golden Sun and adaptations on existing franchises like Final Fantasy Tactics and Advance Wars adapted from Famicom Wars. The GBA was loaded with classic titles that had appeal for both the mainstream and hardcore gamers alike, so it's easy to see why it sold so well. Number 8, with 82 million units sold and just edging out the Game Boy Advance, it's the PlayStation Portable. To me, this is a shocking entry because when you think about the seminal consoles that everyone had to have, the PSP isn't necessarily one of the first that you'll think of. But to be fair, it is credited with bringing franchises like Grand Theft Auto, Metal Gear and Gran Turismo on the move, which is an obvious appeal for those who are fans of the PlayStation franchise. In at number 7, with 83.8 million units sold, it's the PlayStation 3. It was 2006 that saw the release of the PlayStation 3, and with key titles such as the Grand Theft Auto series now being available on multiple platforms on launch day, it was perhaps less about the exclusive software and more about the hardware. This was the first console to offer a Blu-ray disc player, and it was so powerful it's even been used by the US military to build supercomputers. The PlayStation 3 boasted great graphics and was certainly more reliable than its counterpart, which, well, I guess we'll get onto that now. In at number 6, with 84 million units sold and just beating the PS3, it's the Xbox 360 from Microsoft. This was Microsoft's second venture into the home console gaming market, following up on the Xbox, and whilst it didn't have many exclusive titles, it did have some heavy hitters such as the Halo series, Gears of War, and I made a game with zombies in it. It didn't have a Blu-ray player like the PlayStation 3 did, but as you can see, that certainly hasn't hurt its sales. It still allowed you to integrate the third-party apps such as watching TV and YouTube, or maybe the increase in sales can be explained by the amount of people that had to buy another console because of the dreaded red ring of death, which meant that 54% of Xbox 360s would fail after only 2 years. Number 5, with 101.63 million units sold, it's the Nintendo Wii. After so-so sales of the GameCube, Nintendo needed a big boost, and the Wii's accessible software and fun motion controls opened up the Nintendo universe to the whole family. Featuring all the Nintendo classics, this took a step away from the true hardcore gamers and opted more for the widespread appeal. And in terms of sales, it worked tremendously. Even your gran could play the Nintendo Wii, and the brand's host of beloved characters were able to appeal to a whole new generation. Number 4, with 102.49 million sales, it's the iconic SONY PlayStation. The SONY PlayStation is a true triumph of having both style and substance. It's a success story in branding, marketing, and having that widespread appeal but having the quality games to back it up. We were blessed with some absolute classics on the system such as Gran Turismo, Metal Gear Solid, Tomb Raider, Crash Bandicoot. We even had our first ever Grand Theft Auto game on the system, but don't forget, it also had one of the best loading screens and sounds of all time. Number 3, with 118.69 million units sold, it's the Game Boy and Game Boy Color. Now personally, I think it's a little bit dodgy to include the Game Boy and Game Boy Color and group it together as one singular console, but Nintendo will let it slide this time. You have to give Nintendo credit here because the Game Boy managed to maintain popularity from 1989 right up until the Game Boy Advance was released. And in the early days you had titles like Tetris, which is still fun to play to this day, and later on you had games like Pokemon Red, Blue and Yellow, for God's sakes. It allowed handheld multiplayer gaming, and it will go down as the first truly iconic widespread handheld console that every single person had to have. The Game Boy is undoubtedly a classic. In number 2, with 154.02 million units sold, it's none other than the Nintendo DS. This is another surprise entry for me, because as amazing as the DS is, it's difficult to think that it outsold the Game Boy, but apparently so, and by a decent margin as well. Going back to the mid-2000s once again, Nintendo was in trouble after questionable GameCube sales, and the former president of Nintendo was even quoted as saying, "If the DS succeeds, we will rise to heaven, but if it fails, we will sink to hell." Well, nice and cheery then, Nintendo. But not to worry, it does seem that they indeed went to heaven, because the Nintendo DS was a massive success, which is interesting because when they first announced their concept for the console, the details they gave away is that it would be handheld and it would have 2 screens, and as you can imagine, mass panic ensued. But Nintendo proved that they are to be trusted because they were able to provide a more immersive gaming experience that gamers responded to and bought in their millions. Okay folks, without digressing any further, it is time for our number 1, with 155.2 million units sold. It is the iconic Sony PlayStation 2. The PS2 was so successful that it was only actually discontinued a few years ago. Its run lasted from 2000 all the way to the tail end of 2013. The PS2 took what was successful about the PlayStation and just took it to a whole new level. We got to see the likes of Grand Theft Auto 3, which took that franchise to a place that we never thought possible, and it really was a revolutionary moment in gaming. Not only that, we got our favourite franchises like Metal Gear Solid and Gran Turismo, which retained the awesome gameplay, but we got to see it with new, crisp, amazing visuals. To me, it's absolutely no surprise that the PlayStation 2 holds the top spot in this list, and when it came out, it was a huge leap in gaming. It's as acclaimed critically as it is commercially, and the PlayStation 2 truly is the king of console gaming. This has been the 10 best-selling video games consoles of all time, and we hope that you've enjoyed watching it as much as we have researching and making it. I've been Joe Hendry, and you can follow me at Joe S. Hendry on Twitter. This is What Culture Gaming, and make sure that you like and share the video, and also subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you next time.